Silver Crown by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 5, The Shiny Blue Car. Down 30th Avenue a few doors, Ellen found a small grocery store where she bought a loaf of bread. It cost 25 cents instead of 22 cents because this was not a supermarket. That left her with only $1.21. But still, she had, after all, had 2 free sandwiches. Across the street from the grocery store she saw a gas station with a rack in front, and in the rack were rows on rows of road maps. She waited for the traffic light to change, and then, with her bread in a brown paper bag under her arm, she walked across. Parked near the map rack stood a large, new, shiny, dark blue car, behind the wheel of which sat a young man with a pleasant smile on his face. Ellen walked up to the rack and stood before the array of maps, looking at their titles. She remembered that on their trip to Aunt Sarah's they had used several maps, and she also remembered what they were: Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky. She spotted Virginia and West Virginia immediately, both conveniently on the same map. She took one of these, now to find Kentucky. "You look puzzled," a voice said. "I don't suppose I can help." It was the smiling young man, emerged from his shiny car and standing behind her. His voice was as happy as his face, though a rather high voice, young-sounding. "Thank you," Ellen answered. "I'm trying to find a map of Kentucky, but I can't see any." "No," said the young man, scanning the rack quickly. "There aren't any. That's because it's too far away. Most gas stations only have maps of the states near them." He looked at the rack again and pulled out a map. "This might help." He opened it up. Its title was Southeastern United States Interstate Highway System. "This has Kentucky on it, but it's not very big. It depends on what you need it for. Are you doing a geography lesson?" "No," Ellen said. "I need it because I'm going there." "Are you?" said the young man, his voice happier than ever. "Now that's strange. I'm from Kentucky myself. In fact, I'm on my way there now. I don't suppose you'd like a ride?" He said this last very casually, as if it were really intended as a joke, but Ellen did not take it as a joke. It was instead an amazing piece of good luck. "Oh!" she said, almost ready to cry again. "Could I? I was going to try to hitchhike." The young man seemed not at all surprised to find a girl of 10 planning to hitchhike so far, and all alone, but he did suddenly appear doubtful, as if he were embarrassed that an innocent joke had been taken so seriously. His smile disappeared, or almost. "I don't know," he said dubiously. "I was planning to start right now and drive all night. I'm afraid you'd get too tired." "Oh, I don't mind that at all," Ellen said. I've often slept in cars." "Well," said the young man, sounding doubtful, "I suppose you could sleep in the back seat. It's big enough, and it's empty." "Oh, please," Ellen said. "I was worried about the hitchhiking because I'm not sure how you wave your thumb. If I ride with you, I don't have to do it." "That's no trick," said the young man, and he showed her how to do it, waving his hand and thumb in a proper hitchhiking arc and turning his smile up even higher. "You always want to smile when you hitchhike," he explained. At the end of the lesson, he extended the hand to her, and she shook hands with him, closing the bargain. "All right," he said, "you got a ride." She climbed into the big blue car, into the front seat, sat down beside him, and they drove off. In her lap she held her handbag, her loaf of bread, and the 2 road maps. "I'm Arthur Gates," said the young man after a moment. "I'm a teacher. What's your name?" She said, "Ellen Carroll. I'm going to Kentucky to visit my aunt." "Kentucky is 400 miles long and 200 miles wide. What part of Kentucky does your aunt live in?" "Near Lexington," Ellen said. "Near a village called Oakstable." "You're in luck," Mr. Gates said. "I go right through Lexington," and his smile grew broader than ever. In luck indeed. Half an hour earlier, Ellen had had only the vaguest idea of how she would get to the Blue Hill. Now she was on her way in luxury. Tomorrow she would be there. It was incredible luck. Mr. Gates drove very fast, and not very skillfully, Ellen thought, so there was quite a lot of unnecessary slamming on of brakes and occasional screeching of tires. Still, in half an hour or so, they were out of the city traffic. On the open highway there were very few cars, and in another hour they had reached the first of the mountains. Ellen loved mountains. The way the big car swung up the highway into them made her feel as if she were flying, as you feel on a sled sometimes when you come down a steep slope and zoom up another. She loved the forests that covered them with hardly a house anywhere. The day was beautiful and sunny, and there was just enough wind to toss the leaves and make them sparkle in the sunlight. As they went higher, they drove through long miles of pine woods. From a distance, a solid coat of green fir on the mountain's back. But up close, looking from the car window through the trees, an endless series of pillars growing up through dark, mysterious chambers with carpeted brown floors. The sight always made Ellen want to get out and walk through their shadowy corridors, heading up and up until she reached the top of the mountain, the only person for miles around. Mr. Gates did not talk much. He seemed preoccupied, as if he were thinking about some private problem that had nothing to do with driving the car. And he had the oddest way every now and then of breaking into an absolutely delighted smile, so that Ellen kept expecting him to chuckle and tell her what it was about, but he never did. At first, Ellen thought she ought to try to make conversation, so she asked, more out of politeness than curiosity, "What kind of a school do you teach in?" Mr. Gates then did a very odd thing. He jumped, almost as if he had forgotten she was there. Then he turned his head slightly, held out his right hand, and said, "I'm Arthur Gates. I'm a teacher. What's your name?" This was exactly what he had said before when they first met, and it was said in precisely the same tones, as if he had memorized it. But before she could answer, Mr. Gates recovered, blinked his eyes, and his smile went away. He added quickly, "You might call it a sort of training school for boys. Well, mostly boys, but now we're beginning to get a few girls, too." And then, at that, his smile returned, and grew bigger and happier than ever, but he did not say anything more. There was something very strange about him, Ellen decided, but it did not really matter. Whatever he was smiling about, he was taking her to Kentucky, and at a very fast clip, too. She wondered how many miles they had come. She knew there was a dial on the dashboard that showed mileage, but she could not read it from where she sat. After a while, she made up a sort of mile game. When the road was straight enough, she would pick out a landmark, a big tree, a clump of pines, a cliff, a fence, that she guessed would be a mile ahead, and when in a minute they had whooshed past it, that was one more mile closer to the Blue Hill and Aunt Sarah. The sun sunk lower in the sky, and the woods grew dark and more mysterious, and Ellen began to feel sleepy. She also felt hungry again, and she remembered the sandwich remaining in her pocket. She also remembered to be polite. She took out the sandwich, broke it in two, and said to Mr. Gates, "Would you like half of my sandwich? It's peanut butter and jam." This time Mr. Gates responded quite normally. "No, thank you," he said. "I ate just before we left. I don't plan to eat again until we're there." Well, almost normally. "Until we're there" sounded to Ellen as if he were going to Aunt Sarah's too, or at least as if they were both going to the same place. And they weren't really. What he meant, of course, must be until we get to Kentucky. She munched the sandwich. It had grown stale, the peanut butter stuck to the top of her mouth, and she realized she was quite thirsty. Whenever she had taken a trip with her family, they had always taken along a bottle of water or milk in a thermos, or Cokes in an ice bucket, because somebody was forever getting thirsty. But there was no bottle anywhere to be seen in Mr. Gates's car. In fact, it was as empty and shiny as if he had just bought it. She finished her dry sandwich, and then, suddenly, she was asleep. She slept as the dark came on, as Mr. Gates turned on the headlights, and the big car hurtled through the night like a bright-eyed blue beetle, droning its narrow way through the miles of black trees. She came only half awake once, when Mr. Gates stopped the car at a filling station and bought gas. She had a vague impression that he also made a telephone call. She slept in the front seat, not the back, scrunched over in the corner. She did not know how late it was, nor how long she had been asleep, when she was awakened by a loud squealing of brakes, a long and frightening screech of tires. The car swung fiercely from side to side as it skidded, and then stopped so abruptly that she was thrown forward and hit her head hard on the dashboard. Ahead of them, just a few inches from the headlights, a truck had run partly off the highway. It lay at an odd angle, its left rear wheels up in the air like a tilted elephant's feet, its front wheels in the ditch. The trailer's rear doors had sprung open, and there were boxes and cartons lying all over the road. The trailer itself was blocking half the highway, and they had come within a foot of crashing into it. Ellen scarcely glanced at all this. When she bumped her head, the blow made her see, at first, a bright flash of light. It vanished, but there still remained a softer light directly in front of her eyes, and now she saw why. She had struck her head on the button that snaps the glove compartment shut. It had fallen open, and a small light had turned on, illuminating its interior. When Mr. Gates saw this, he reached over very quickly and slammed it shut. But not before Ellen saw, lying inside the compartment, a pistol with a long barrel she recognized instantly, and a shimmering green hood with 2 eye holes staring vacantly up at her. And that's the end of chapter 5.